All right, next up we have Hunter, starting with Absorbent Parasite, a 2-cost 3/1 with Magnetic and Rush. Can magnetize to mechs and beasts. So this is a very interesting card. It's also weird that it doesn't itself have types. This being able to magnetize to mechs and beasts feels like it should be a mech or beast, or mech and beast. I guess it's just a blob of goo, but this I think is a an interesting card. Being able to immediately get like the ability to rush like a wide variety of stuff gives you a lot of ability to like come back on the board. There is a lot of sort of scariness to this because the ability to magnetize to beasts. There's already some pretty powerful beasts around that have either could use rush or could just use additional attack. Right. This on like a Hollow Hound, which is already one of the stronger cards. This buffed by say Hope of Quel'Thalas and or Lorthamar, magnetizing to big things, right? Feels very, very powerful. Being able to like attach this again to like a Hollow Hound, it's like, oh look, I'm gonna cleave your entire board for 8 million. You can magnetize this to a monkey and just smash them, right? Like out of the barrel of monkeys. So this feels like it's a very, very powerful card to me. And the fact that again, it can magnetize two beasts, which are the primary minion type that we see in Hunter, feels like it does a lot to give you the ability to sort of play from behind that you already had quite a bit of because of Hollow Hound, and this just kind of adds to that and feels quite powerful to me. Speaking of Hollow Hound, here's Always a Bigger Jormungandr. This is a funny card as far as the name, but 1 cost. Give a minion +2 attack and excess damage dealt by attacks hits the enemy hero. Speaking of Hollow Hound, I feel like Hollow Hound is a card that has kind of had a lot of people have had their eyes on as like hey, maybe this should be nerfed. And I think that Hollow Hound is pretty clearly one of the most powerful cards in Hunter. And alongside this, a Hollow Hound can like cleave your opponent's stuff and like absolutely blow them up and kill them, right? Because the excess damage dealt by the attacks hitting the enemy hero works with every portion of the Hollow Hound cleave. So if your opponent has, say a Hollow Hound, you have the Hollow Hound, they have like 3 2/2s. Just an unbuffed Hollow Hound, right, is going to hit your opponent with this. Is going to hit your opponent for 9 if you attack the middle 2/2. And then you still have the body on the board, and you still gained 15 life, right? So that seems pretty scary. It's also a 1-cost spell, which means that Trinket Tracker draws it. So, you can literally even just play like one of these in your deck and just have that like angle of being able to, I'll either hit the Trinket Tracker or I'll hit a tracking and eventually find it and just blow you up. By itself, it's not a super powerful card. But if you have, again, Hollow Hound specifically, or even just like a very high power rush minion, right? Like a Mukla, this could just be huge burst damage that you weren't expecting. So this is a pretty scary card, I think. Imagine we're just talking about like the Hollow Hounds with no buffs, right? Hollow Hound with like Lorthamar is just lethal, right? Like Hollow Hound with Hope of Quel'Thalas, Lorthamar is like, okay, this is already 8 power. Now I'm gonna make it 10 power and attack your thing and just kill you. So yeah. And that's before we even get into like magnetizing parasites that are also buffed. So yeah, this is a terrifying card. I think that there being cards like this is exciting. But this one is a scary level exciting given what is already around in the format. And I expect this to be kind of a terror in Hunter decks moving forward. Next we have Awakening Tremors. A 1-cost spell, get 3 4/1 worms. They cost 1. It's a weird card. Obviously for a like, there's not like spell hunter per se in the current format. But like if your opponent isn't playing a class that has like an easy hero power to deal with this, just like play this turn 1, turn 2, play 2 4/1s. And if they're not like, mage / whatever, it seems pretty scary. I assume the worms are beasts, but yeah, it is a very interesting card. I don't know that this is necessarily like a like particularly powerful card because there's already so many powerful tools in Hunter right now. But this does like at least give you the potential to like just put on a lot of aggression. The weird thing in my mind is like X1s are so easy to kill for a lot of classes like Mage and Death Knight, you know, in terms of just like being able to clear them with their hero power, that spending, you know, like multiple turns worth of mana on putting some of them out is, you know, pretty weak. And yeah, there's so many like one drops that can easily trade into them that you've, you know, already spent multiple mana on them. But yeah, it's a very interesting card if you have like ways to like give them like rush or charge. They become, I think, particularly powerful. Like I think Houndmaster is legal, right? Like the 3/6 that gives all your guys rush, that would be, you know, pretty strong alongside this because you just rush them into things and whatnot. But I feel like it's unlikely that a deck that like, you know, uses this compared to the sort of shell we've already seen with more durable minions, alongside, you know, once again, always bigger Jermunger plus Hollow Hounds is likely to be, you know, the more dominant build of that sort. Next we have Bait and Switch. There are some powerful secret tools in this set, and this is definitely one of them. When a friendly minion is attacked, give it +3/+3. We were already talking about monkeys, right? The Barrel of Monkeys is already a pretty powerful card in Hunter, giving you, you know, multiple instances of 1/4 taunts for 2. Well, if those are 4/7 taunts, that seems a lot scarier. So yeah, right now, you know, there's basically like two secrets that people tend to play in the form of Hidden Meaning and Zombies, and this feels like a very powerful third option for those decks, particularly alongside some of the other secret synergy that does exist in the class in this set. Next up we have Fable Stablehand, a 3-cost 3/3 rush with Battlecry. If you control a minion with 4 or more attack, gain +2/+2. So this is kind of a weird one. You know, having a 5/5 rush for 3 is quite strong. A 3/3 rush for 3 is meh. But the ability to get a minion with 4 more attack is pretty easy in Hunter, particularly with bananas. You know, if you play, if you play bananas with like a Vicious Slither Spear, or if you just play it with the, you know, the Tremors, right, and get your 4/1s, you know, does feel like there's a lot of options to be able to get this, you know, online pretty quickly. And frankly, playing like a 4/1 for 1 on turn 4 alongside a 5/5 rush, that's a pretty powerful turn, right? That your opponent at least has to answer the 5/5, and, you know, spending like a hero power, for instance, killing the 4/1 does leave them pretty far behind. Next up, we have Observer of Myths, a 2-cost 1/4. After you summon a minion with more attack than this, give all friendly minions +1 attack. So this is another card that maybe the Worms want to go with. Playing the Tremors along with this guy gives you a lot of cheap ways to potentially buff your board. This card seems very powerful, right? Hunter has you know, a quite a few tools to make a wide board. We've talked quite a bit already about the bananas and the monkeys. Most of the monkeys for in the case of this, but you know, Hunter has a lot of just like ability to make like cheap minions, cheap repeatable minions off of, you know, Barrel of Monkeys, and Observer of Myths is real strong when you have a board full of a bunch of small things, and then you can just grow them. You know, being able to play this and play like a 2 power thing and then a 3 power thing, suddenly, you know, your board is just +2 attack and just smashes people, right? So, you know, I do like that this is, you know, a card that encourages a very different type of Hunter deck than we're currently seeing. You know, the Hollow Hound mid-range, like, you know, big sort of Hunter style deck, I feel like is, you know, very much the dominant play pattern for the class right now. And Observer of Myths, you know, really incentivizes you to play like a much more of a cheap go wide style deck. Maybe that's where, you know, again, the sort of Tremors come in, giving you a bunch of cheap ways to buff your entire board with the Observer of Myths. So I'm very curious to see how this plays out. It does seem really, really, really powerful to me. Next up, we have Star-Strung Bow. Speaking of secret synergies, 6-cost 6/2 weapon, costs 1 less for each friendly secret that has triggered this game. This is, you know, a lot of damage, right? Like a 6-power weapon is a really big weapon. That said, 6 is a lot of mana, and your secrets have to trigger. It's not secrets you've played; it's secrets that have triggered. So, you know, in order to get this reduced say, 2 mana, you are bare minimum having invested 4 mana in secrets before that. It is interesting because let's just go to the next card, which is our last Hunter card, which is Titanforce Trap, which is discover cast a secret. So it's not secrets cast, it's secrets triggered, which means that with a card like this, you can potentially get more discounts than you've actually played secrets. So one of the things about this card in particular, Titanforce Traps, and again, another card that does synergize with the bow, which if you're a very secret-heavy deck can be very powerful. One of the things about secrets is that when there is a sort of a standardized list that people have come to expect, they're like, I am going to play around. In this case, bees and hidden meaning are the two hunter secrets that have become kind of omnipresent in the various hunter decks. Alongside, obviously, the Costume Singer, which is kind of the glue that holds all that together. Being able to get secrets that are not among those that they are used to playing around in a matchup is very, very valuable, right? Being able to, make your opponent play around things that are not like immediately on their mind can, kind of gum up the works and make the matchup play out differently than they anticipate. And you can also kind of increase your chances of getting particular secrets by playing other secrets that your opponent having not triggered your secrets yet. And all that really, kind of adds up to, I think, this card being pretty good. Obviously the early in the game, maybe you're just like looking to curve and play this and get a secret. Later in the game, it's basically, if you have extra mana, 2 extra mana on one turn, or if you just want to spend this like 4 up front for this, being able to get 2 secrets for 4 is like pretty powerful, especially when you have things that care about those secrets like the bow. So overall, I think that the hunter card pool is pretty interesting. Obviously in our very first review video, we talked about the Titan, which I think is quite powerful. It's important to note that the Titan will upgrade your whatever weapon you happen to have. If you're like, if you do have the Star-Strung Bow, you can make that even more powerful if you play that and then use the Titan abilities. But I do think that the card that stands out the most to me, the 2 cards, are always a bigger Germunger, because wow, is this powerful with Hollowhound, and will likely make people hate that card even more. And then also Observer of Myth. I think that it's also interesting that these are cards that pull you in very different directions. Always a bigger Germunger wants you to have individual gigantic things, or specifically Hollowhound to cleave through and do a ton of extra damage with those attacks. Observer of Myths wants you to have a wide board that you then buff by playing incrementally bigger minions. So I appreciate the fact that what I view as the 2 strongest cards in this, alongside the Titan, who I do think is also excellent and is more of kind of a deck agnostic thing, is just very powerful. I think that, you have a couple of different directions to take your hunter decks that are both going to smork, but do it in different ways. So looking forward to how that all plays out. And that's Hunter. Let's move along. All right, next up we have Mage, which is frankly coming in hot as I'm recording this. Literally just posted today. Spoiler, that's when I'm recording this. First up we have Archivist. I was going to say, architect, but it's Archivist. It kind of feels like an architect, though, rather than Archivist. An Archivist feels like it'd be more about, like, knowledge and spells. This allows you to build on your elementals. But regardless, 2 cost 2/2 elemental. Battle card, the next elemental you play costs 2 less. This is sort of interesting, because we've had a lot of, like, elemental mage stuff that doesn't really feel like it has enough support, right? There's not really, like, a lot of elementals. There's a decent number of things that involve elementals, right? There's Synthesize, which gives you some random elementals. There's like, if you played if you played an elemental, if you play a spell last turn, discover an elemental. But there's just like kind of a lot of things that are like kind of throwaway elementals, and not that many actual elementals. So this one feels weird because like this is like extremely powerful effect, right? Getting a two cost discount on on an elemental is very, very powerful, but there's not that many great like elementals to follow this up with. So that's the weird place that this card feels like it lives in. Like, are you just like trying to turbo out a Ragnaros? Right? Are you playing this and like playing a turn 6 Ragnaros? That is cool, but doesn't really feel like a deck exactly. So I think this is definitely a card to keep an eye on, but I don't know if there's necessarily enough support for this to actually be good right now, because I just don't know how many powerful elementals actually exist in Standard. Speaking of powerful stuff, Chillimatic. Remember Snowchugger? Well, poor Snowchugger didn't have Magnetic. This is basically 2 cost 2/3 freeze any character damaged by this minion mech. That was just Snowchugger, right? Chillomatic, though, comes with even more power, magnetic, so you can have an early game mech and just hook this on. This is a very strong card, right? Being able to keep any opponent who cares about attacking with a weapon down or just attacking with their face down is a really, really powerful thing. You know, against, for instance, like Enraged Warrior, right? Enraged Warrior, you know, very frequently leans heavily on imbued axe and being able to repeatedly freeze them, and even repeatedly freeze them when you didn't start a turn with this on board, right? One of the huge things about this is that because it has magnetic, any mech that you have on the board ends up getting, you know, able to connect with this. And, you know, your opponent has like leaves like just one thing there, and suddenly they're never able to attack again unless they have non-weapon based removal, which of course those decks do in the form of like rush minions and things like that. However, you know, this being able to just like, you know, repeatedly chip away at them and magnetize onto something that may have a lot of health makes it very difficult to actually clear it. So pretty powerful card. Interestingly enough, this is freeze any character damaged by this, and with magnetic, that means you can put this on something that has other damage triggers, right? Put this on, say, Gaia, or any other mech when you have a Gaia, and suddenly you're freezing your opponent's entire board with each attack. Put this on the Shark, right? On the Mechano Shark, and suddenly, even if you're not killing your opponent's minions, they're getting frozen by the blasts going everywhere. So I think this card is really, really powerful, and you know, I would be unsurprised to see a resurgence in Mech Mage in large part based on this. Next up, we have Discovery of Magic. Discovery a spell from a spell school you haven't cast this game from any class. So this is interesting because there's, you know, a number of cards that care about sort of the multi-school stuff in this set in particular. This being able to discover a spell from any spell school, specifically also from any class, also works, you know, very well with like a Ramath strategy. You know, this can obviously, in the early turns of the game, this can get you anything, right? But also allows you to sort of narrow things down and get, you know, more things that can specifically power up your cards that do care about spell schools, or, you know, get you like interesting things, you know, again, with like Ramath being able to like, oh, look, I've cast all the normal mage spells, maybe I can get Holy and find some healing. So I'm always someone who loves to see Ramath support, and, you know, additionally, the other spell school related things in this set, I think this is a cool card. Next up, we have Elemental Inspiration. 7 cost, summon a 4/5 Vortex with a random bonus effect for each spell school you've cast this game. This is a confusing text. My initial read of this was basically, this is a really bad one amalgam band, right? Like, one amalgam band is a 6/6 with a bonus effect for each minion type you've played. And this being a bonus effect for each spell school you've played would be pretty bad. But apparently, this summons a 4/5 for each spell school you've cast. So the text makes it sound terrible, but in reality, I think this actually seems like it's pretty good. Because if you cast 4 spell schools, right? This is making 4 4/5s with a random bonus effect. So this probably should say summon 1 4/5 Vortex with a random bonus effect for each spell school, rather than because it seems that the you know, bonus effect is what's being you know, modified by the clause for each spell school, rather than the number. If there's a number, it feels like that is making it more clear what's happening. But regardless, with that in mind, this feels powerful, right? This is something that actually builds up a board. And is a pretty strong payoff for, you know, having cast a bunch of spell schools. If you just cast the normal mage spell schools, 3 4/5s with, you know, random effects, that's pretty strong, right? If you have other things that are giving you, you know, more spell schools outside of that, obviously from the Discovery of Magic or something like that, then, you know, all of a sudden you're getting like a full board of 4/5s that are giving, you know, with all these abilities. And, you know, if they have Taunt, Rush, Divine Shield, a lot of various things they could have that could make them very impactful. So this card, I think, is a major payoff for that style of deck. And, you know, obviously you need that style of deck to be good, but if it is, this is a big reason why. Next we have a Molten Rune, 3-cost spell. Deal 3 damage, get a random spell. It is a fire spell itself. Forge this casts twice. My assumption is get a random spell means random any spell, right? This isn't random mage spell, because otherwise it would typically say that. This is another way to, you know, fuel your your multi-spell school thing, another way to potentially fuel raw math. Very frequently, Mage doesn't necessarily have a ton to do on turn 2. Very frequently, you have Mage just like hero powering on 2. So being able to forge on 2 with this is not at all unreasonable. So, this, again, feels like the sort of card, has a lot of potential in a multi-spell school thing, also a lot of potential in a raw math deck, and certainly something that I am excited to try. Next up, we have Sith. 6 cost, 4/6 spell damage +1, improved by each spell school you've cast this game. So, a 6 cost spell damage minion is generally not going to be that good, because a lot of the spell damage stuff that you want is going to be paired with, more expensive things. But obviously, with improved by each spell school you've cast this game, that starts to add up. Say you've cast 4 spell schools, 5 spell schools. This just by itself, is a Malagos, right? It's a 6 cost Malagos. And if you have, say, a Frozen Touch, that is a single card that can just nuke your opponent for a ton of damage, right? You can use it with Light Show, right? This with Light Show is suddenly, okay, well, kaboom, 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 your opponent explodes because each of the things does, 8 damage or whatever. So yeah, I think this is a very, very cool card that is, one of the major payoffs there. Being able to imagine like, discovering Unleash Fell and getting to pretend that you're a demon hunter who gets to, Reno yourself and kill your opponent's board. Boom. Sif's a great way to help with that too. So yeah, I think this is, obviously one of the major sort of incentives to play multi-school stuff. And, because of the fact that so many of the cards available to Mage in that style give you stuff from other classes, from other spell schools, from outside the game, the potential for this is going to be huge. So I'm excited for it for sure. Next up is Unchained Gladiator. 4 cost, 4/4 elemental, battlecry, draw a card, repeat for each elemental you played last turn. This is another card that kind of is in the weird space of like, well, this card is clearly very powerful, right? This card, can be a huge burst turn of drawing a ton of cards because you played out a bunch of stuff, but where's all the elementals you're doing it with, right? Like this with Synthesize, with, the Aqua Archivist, yeah, you can do a bunch of stuff and draw a bunch of stuff, but what is your deck doing? What is like your goal? How are all these elementals really paying off is what feels confusing here. So, like, this is, I think, very clearly an extremely powerful card, given the tools that are already available. But, like, the question is, like, what does it lead to? It doesn't feel like there's enough, like, elemental stuff to really, like, build an elemental deck that is doing anything other than enabling this card. I mean, maybe do you have, like, an elemental package with, like, Synthesize and this and the Aqua Architect, Archivist. I keep thinking Architect because it builds things, but regardless, this is just a card draw package in a deck, right? Like where else are you going with this? I feel like these, once again, are like a set of cards that have a lot of potential but don't necessarily have the payoff right now. And I am very curious to see once they actually get there. And lastly, for Mage, we have Wisdom of Norganon, 5 cost arcane spell. Draw 2 cards, costs 1 less for each different spell school you've cast this game. So once again, it's pretty clear what the overall theme for Mage is in this particular expansion is the different spell schools that you've cast. And, this is very, very clearly very powerful. If you get this, you've played 3 spell schools, it's like, all right, this is at 2 costs. You played 4 spell schools, it's 1. You played 5 spell schools, 0. So this is kind of like just a glue card. It's obviously not like what is actually winning you the game by any means, but, a deck that is specifically looking to get a bunch of different pieces together that, are like the various enables and payoffs. Card draw is very important in that style deck, and having card draw that importantly has a type itself, right, is also a very good way to, really tie the room together. This is basically the rug from the Big Lebowski right here for that deck. Anyway, that's Mage. So, as I just mentioned, I do really feel like Mage is primarily in this expansion, a bunch of different spell schools thing. And honestly, I like it. Cards like the Discovery of Magic, cards like Molten Rune, those are the sort of cards that I generally really enjoy because they create, different play experiences from game to game. I would way rather, live in a world where we're heavily supporting a deck like this rather than like, playing like Freeze Mage or like, Kel'Thuzad Mage or frankly even Naga Mage where like the play patterns are even in that case, with a deck that like does discover a bunch of extra stuff outside the game end up being extremely like kind of scripted and repetitive. Not to say that there isn't like, interesting strategy involved in the way that those games play out from the side of the Naga Mage player, but this just feels like it does more cool stuff, and that's what I'm into. So let's hear it for Cool Stuff Mage, and let's move along. All right, next up, we have Paladin. And to start, we have Astral Serpent. It is a 4-cost 3/3. It is a dragon. At the end of your turn, if this didn't attack, draw 2 cards. So this is a very, very interesting card. Because A, it's a dragon. Dragons are cool. Everyone knows that. B, this is Paladin card draw that can just stick around, right? So, this if you just play it, you get a 3/3, you draw 2 cards. Did I kill your 3/3? Okay, great. They traded with your 3/3. If not, you drew 2 more cards. So, it's kind of like an Arcane Intellect that is stapled to a 3/3, so it has even more potential upside. So I think this is like a very interesting card for like a mid-range dragon paladin deck, or just potentially like just a mid-range paladin deck that's not looking to like, be super aggressive or anything, which I think is very, very, very reasonable thing. I do think that like you need very, very powerful incentives to not just play pure paladin. And this feels like it can be like in the range of that. Because pure paladin right now, right? Pure paladin in standard right now has a ton of cheap proactive stuff, a ton of good, reactive stuff in the form of like class action lawyer. It has like great long game in the form of Purator and Countess. So you need a lot to justify not just playing pure paladin, and I do feel like there's actually a pretty good selection of like dragon options that, and this being a dragon, I think helps solidify the possibility of using cards like Amber Whelp that can similarly be a powerful tempo tool, not in quite the same way as something like a class action lawyer, but at least gives you some degree of tempo and ability to get back on the board while still playing a minion-based deck. So, but this card, I am impressed by it. Very frequently, a lot of Paladin decks kind of run out of steam without access to quality card draw, and this is certainly that. Next up, we have Disciple of Ametis. A 6-cost 4/6. At the end of your turn, summon a 2/2 Earthen that gains +2/+2 for each other Earthen you've summoned this game. Obviously, this requires context of the other Earthen. So let's take a look at Stoneheart King. 4-cost 3/2 with Death Rattle. Summon a 2/2 Earthen that gains +2/+2 for each other Earthen you've played this game. So it's kind of a Jade Paladin-ish type situation, right? And it's interesting because there's not that many Earthen things, right? But having things that like repeatedly summon, repeatedly summon guys if your opponent doesn't kill them, does give you, at least some like long game potential with them. And also having this attached to a like Death Rattle effect on the Stoneheart King does mean that like you have at least some degree of protection from, AoE and such, right? It does feel a little lacking as far as, the overall power level of it without having some sort of like copy effects to gain additional versions of them, because there's not, going through the rest of them, there's not like that many things that really synergize with this. There's just those Earthen, right? Like I'm literally going through the other things. I mean, there are, say, these, right? There are the resurrection effects, right? There's Tears. This is resurrect 3 different paladin minions, set their stats to 2/2. Forge, resurrect another. So this is certainly a way that if you're playing a deck that is focused on like, Earthen, that You can get more earthen with more powerful effects. And the death throttles make resurrecting those like resurrect more, potentially create more earthens down the line. So it is, and crucially, these are specifically resurrect paladin minions. And I believe tier, tier was resurrect minions with different powers. And crucially, if you look at these, let's go. This is a 4 power minion, which is the highest point at which tier works. This is a 3 power minion. So you do have the possibility to have this as your only 3, this is your only 4, and use tier, and then play primarily other neutral minions so that your tiers, right, which summons paladin minions, will bring back just your things that create more earthens. So it feels like this is like kind of a package, right? That does restrict you in terms of your deck building in a very meaningful way. And it is very awkward because like if you do have additional paladin minions besides those and besides tier, I guess you can always forge this and then you get some value there. But I guess the rest of your deck kind of has to be basically neutral minions and paladin spells and weapons, or else you like run the risk of this not bringing back your earthens to continue the sort of chain. But it is kind of interesting because paladin, like recruits, I assume count as paladin minions, right? So that does mean that like you basically have to forge this in order to get that option to get ensured you have everything back. But if you do have 2 copies of this, 1 copy of tier, you end up bringing back an earthen as a 2/2. You bring back your death rattle guy or earthen as your 2 power guy, death rattle guy as your 3 power guy, summon at the end of your turn guy as your 4 power guy, and your recruit as your 1 power guy, and there you go, right? And the rest of your deck ends up being neutrals that are like copy effects or maybe bounce effects for, I guess bounce effects don't work, but bounce effects for tier. There's a variety of things that you could just like continue to create more earthens with by making extra copies of these cards or by finding other avenues. But it does feel like a challenging deck build, which frankly is interesting. But like all you got out of it is a bunch of stats, and I don't know if that's necessarily enough in the modern world. But it feels a little clunky to me. But it certainly feels like something that is worth experimenting with at least. But speaking of paladin spells, you could play in a deck like that, or in a variety of other decks. Judge Unworthy. Set an enemy minion's health to 1, then deal 1 damage to all enemies. So this is basically like, not quite a quality consecration in 1, but kind of close. This guarantees it kills something. It gives you, AoE. It is something that maybe you play this along with equality or whatever, right? This is basically like, very similar to like a swipe, right? Where you're able to kill a bunch of small things. This is something that gives you reason to play like spell power in Paladin, right? Like maybe you're playing, this with like Blood Mage Thalnos because you're getting the consecration effect in addition to kill any individual guy, as well as like knocking out a bunch of small guys too. So this is, I think this individually is powerful as a direct removal effect. This is also something which combines with the quality that isn't consecration, which is like kind of become relatively inefficient, comparatively speaking, in the modern world. Even at 3 cost, I think consecration struggles a little bit because of how many things are like 3 toughness right these days. So I feel like this as a even more ways to work with consecration, or just like rather even more ways to work with the quality, or just like a substitute for consecration in those sort of games. Next up we have Inventors Aura. So these Aura cards are new as a like card type essentially for Paladin. There are actually a couple that were introduced into the core set as well. I don't have those right here, but this one is Inventors Aura. Your mechs cost 1 less, lasts 2 turns. So this is very interesting because it gives you the ability to like, hey, I'm going to play this now, and like go off next turn, and it's not something they can kill, right? This isn't something that your opponent can kill like a mech warper or whatever. So you can have like a set up for your pop off turn. The kind of what the auras are things that like they have a temporary effect, but again, it's not something your opponent is able to interfere with, which is very 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 powerful, assuming the effect is something that is worth it. this is interesting because, like, you in like a Mech Paladin type deck, obviously the cost reduction is really strong, but you also don't really want that many things that are not mechs because of radar detector. So I feel like, is this something that's worth playing in that deck? Because a lot of that deck is like going to be more of like a tempo oriented thing, where you're largely looking to, like, snowball off of early plays, and you don't really necessarily want to spend your second turn, setting up for a bigger third and fourth turn. But yeah, I feel like this is a card that isn't something that I would probably want to play in a typical Mech Paladin deck. But if I was playing, a Mech Paladin deck that is more sort of like combo oriented, then maybe that's, a place you'd go with it. But speaking of combo oriented stuff, let's look at X21 Repairbot, a 1-cost 1/3 mech, which is, pretty valuable because there aren't really, that many great early game mechs right now. But with Death Rattle, returning a mechs, magnetize this to your hand. So this is, I think, an excellent card for a lot of reasons. One, again, it is an early, fairly stable minion that your opponents won't be able to just, like, clear off and prevent you from getting magnetized stuff on, since it does have 3 toughness for 1. But also, like, if you're playing like a bunch of magnetized stuff, it is very dangerous to pile on a single minion because, well, if it gets killed, you're out of everything. This, obviously, is fully intended for that. You can pile a bunch of things on it, and unless it gets silenced, which, by the way, absolutely devastating if it does, because you lose all the buffs and you lose the death rattle, this ends up being just a really, really good carrier for all of those various magnetized effects. Speaking of which, boom, Noble Minibot. 2-cost 2/3 with Magnetic. After the attacks, give a random minion in your hand +1/+1. So this is obviously a really powerful thing to be able to connect to your other guy on turn 1, which makes a lot of sense since it's literally in the background. Oh no, it was in the background of something else. One of them in the background of the other, right? Yeah. The repair bot's in the background of this guy, getting ready to, magnetize, fix him up. But regardless, you end up with a 3/6 on turn 2 that whenever it attacks, random in your hand gets +1/+1. And if it dies, you get this guy back who can then magnetize into something else. So really strong. This guy, I think, is a really powerful tool just in general, and especially powerful with the repair bot. Very, very strong early game tempo available to you, and doesn't really put you in the sort of pinch of, if this dies, I'm completely screwed, like most magnetic things do, thanks to the repair bot. So overall, the paladin tools, I'm most excited about the dragon, probably foolishly so, but that's what I'm into. But I think the earthen kind of cards are a really weird space. Like I mentioned, they feel like a very interesting deck building puzzle that I'm sure that I will make some attempts to solve. Feels like it would be basically like, this is the way that my, like, maybe control paladin deck looks to win the game, because, I'm just using the various removal effects that are available to paladin, and then, playing these things that give me the earthen, and then trying to resurrect them repeatedly with tear and tears, tears. Say that 7 times fast. Tear and tears, tears, tear and tears, tears, tear and tears, tears. Ugh. And then, being able to sort of build the shell around that to keep getting a larger and larger man in the immortal words of day 9. And yeah, it feels like an interesting way that isn't just like, hey, I build up to a 1-turn kill or whatever, just play a giant thing. This is kind of a, weird attrition-y thing that really I sculpt my deck around, making it work with the resurrect effects, and that seems pretty fun. So overall, I like the set of tools that Paladin's getting from this expansion. I am, not like blown away by anything like I have been for some of the other classes, but definitely interested in the deck building challenge and judging people unworthy because they are.